Shalom. Giving honor and praise to Yah, the Most High, creator and maker of heaven and earth. Name is Yeshaya Yisrael of the tribe of Dan of the nation of Israel. This particular teaching right here is brought to you from the congregation Shema Yisrael, based in Brooklyn, New York. It's entitled The Matter of Deuteronomy 28, verse 68, the extended version, part 1. One of the things we want to emphasize in this particular thing, preaching, teaching, presentation, if you will, is when we say what we say as far as the house of Israel, we want to let it be known that we're dealing in this particular aspect in linguistics and in history and in understanding. Don't mind any constructive criticism. Don't mind any understanding that may even conflict with what we're teaching in this particular regard. But as stated, we are coming to present this linguistic and historic. What you're looking at, brothers and sisters, is here Deuteronomy 28, verse 65. On the left-hand side is a picture of Harriet Tubman, not trying to be funny. Notice she has on a skirt and her gun. And she's leading people from the southern states to the northern states as far as to be free. All right? And it says this, and among these nations thou shalt have no repose, neither shall there be no rest for the sole of your foot, but Yah shall give thee there a trembling heart and filling of eyes and languishing of soul. Now, one of the things we want to point out, brothers and sisters, it distinctly says among these nations. That's in Deuteronomy 28, verse 65. So that means that the children of Israel were scattered among the different nations, which would mean that the Christian apologists who are teaching on Deuteronomy 28 in regards to only being the Israelites and the Romans cannot be the truth. The Hebrew says this, Oba goyim hahem, lo targiyah, wa lo yihye manoach lakaf rag laka, wa natan yah laka, sham leb ragaz, wa kil yon enayim, wa da'abon afesh. So we want that to be pointed out for edification purposes and reasoning. Among these nations. Let's remember that as we go along in this presentation. Next slide, please. Thank you. Deuteronomy 28, verse 68. In order to understand Deuteronomy 28, certain things has to be noted. What is a conjuncture? What is prophecy? Why history is important? And what to do about naysayers. Deuteronomy 28 distinctly says it, the curses, shall be a sign upon you and on your seed. Seed is physical. There is no spiritual Israel. So this is something we want to point out for reason and purposes, because in Christian apologists theology, it's, replacement theology. Jesus Christ came and fulfilled everything, and it's not about the people of Israel, it's about the man Christ, and so forth. But we're going to show, brothers and sisters, blessed be the Most High, that in Deuteronomy, the 28th chapter, verse 68, is a prophecy that came to its fruition after the matter of the New Testament, which to a certain extent has us to ask, how do you have a New Testament when the Old Testament has not yet been fulfilled? But that's a whole nother subject. Okay? Next slide. Thank you. Deuteronomy 28, verse 68, part 3. As More Yeshaya Yisrael, which is myself, pointed out in his book, Egypt Talking Writing, the portion of Deuteronomy 28, 68 starts with the word and. Thus, we have to read before it to understand what is going on. Here is a quick explanation on the matter. sentence structure. And it says this, and the Lord shall bring thee back into Egypt in ships, by the way whereof I said unto thee, thou shalt see it no more again. And there you shall sell yourselves unto your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen, and no man shall buy you. Next point, conjuncture. Joins clauses or sentences or words. This means we have to read before verse 60, before the 68th verse to gain an understanding, because it starts in Deuteronomy 28, verse 68 with the word and. So we have to read before that in order to gain an understanding of what is being joined. Because remember, the word and is part of what causes sentences or words to be joined together. Next slide, please. Thank you. Deuteronomy 28, verse 67 to verse 68. In the morning thou shalt say, would it were even. And at even thou shalt say, would it were morning. For the fear of thy heart which thou shalt fear, and for the sight of thine eyes which thou shalt see. And the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt in ships, by the way whereof I said unto thee, thou shalt see it no more again. And there you shall sell yourselves unto your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen, and no man shall buy you. So this is something we want to point out for edification purposes, that in the second part of the PowerPoint there, it says, and the Lord, and joins it with what is before it, similar to the Shawah in Hebrew, if you will. All right. So next slide, please. Thank you. Deuteronomy 28, verse 58 through verse 59. If thou wilt not observe to do all the words of this law that are written in this book, that thou mayest fear this glorious and awful name, Yehovah Eloheka, the Lord your God, then Yah will make thy plagues wonderful, and the plagues of thy seed, even great plagues, and of long continuance, and sore sicknesses, and of long continuance. So these are the things that is stated will come upon the house of Israel. So the reason it gives is if the children of Israel did not keep the laws, the statutes, and the commandments of the Most High. It says also in part, then Yah will make thy plagues wonderful, and the plagues of your seed. Now, periodically in Deuteronomy 28 here, we're going to run into that word seed. And therefore, the concept of spiritual Israel thus holds no weight, thus holds no prestige, thus holds no reasoning, because there's no such thing as a spiritual seed. That is a physical thing. Even great plagues and of long continuance, and sore sicknesses and of long continuance. So when you read about the sore sicknesses, you have the sickness of the mind, sickness physicality, sickness of spirit, and so forth and so on. All right. So we want that to be pointed out for edification purposes. Next slide, please. Thank you. Deuteronomy 28 notes. If it can be used as a conjunction to bring two clauses together. If we look at Deuteronomy 28, verse 58 to verse 68, all but verse 67 starts with the word and. Thus, we should see that it is all connected. Deuteronomy 28, verse 45 says, next slide, please. Thank you. And all these curses shall come upon thee, and shall pursue thee and overtake thee, till thou be destroyed, because you did not hearken unto the voice of Yehovah Eloheka, the Lord your God, to keep his commandments and his statutes which he commanded thee. Now, that which you see there on the left-hand side is part of the aspect of Deuteronomy 28, verse 45. Now, on the right side, we see this. There are those who like to say that Deuteronomy 28, verse 48 to verse 68 is strictly speaking of the matter of the Israelites and the Romans. Yet, as this presentation will show, such is not the case. Mostly, it is whites who say such, or blacks who think others don't read. So this is something we want to emphasize on in this particular regard. This is a presentation being brought to you from the congregation Shema Yisrael, based in Brooklyn, New York. Next slide, please. Thank you. And it says this, and the Lord shall bring thee back into Egypt in ships, by the way whereof I said unto thee, thou shalt see it no more again. And there you shall sell yourselves unto your enemies for bondmen and for bondwomen, and no man shall buy you. Now, the Hebrew that we see there on the right-hand side, we want to point certain things out. It says this, Weheshibka Yodhe Wahe, Mitzrayim, Be'aniyot, Baderek Asha Amarti Laka, Lo Tosif O Lir Ota, Wahit Makar Tim Sham, La Oibeka, La Abadi, Walit Fakot, Wa In Kone. So let's understand certain points to make out for edification purposes. The first, remember, Hebrews always read from right to left. So when you look at it, looking at it from the top, reading from the right to the left, where means and. Heshib ka. The ka with the kasal feet there at the end of the first word there means you. Heshib means to cause to return. All right? To cause to bring back. Where Heshib ka ya. The Most High will cause you to go back. The Most High will cause you to be sent back. Mitzrayim. We're going to expound on that word as we go along. Ba'aniyot, in ships, with the ships. Baderek, by the way or by the path. Asher, which amarti laka, which I said, which I intended to you. Lo tosif o lir okta. It shall not be added again to you to see it. Lir okta, to see it or to see her. Now, when you're looking, brothers and sisters, at the fifth line that's highlighted or darkened, it says lir okta. The hay has a dagesh in it, and it shows that it's emphasized in that particular regard. All right? Lir okta, to see it or to see her. Wahit makaratim, and you shall devote yourselves, and you shall sell yourselves, sham, there. Lo eberkat, to your enemies. La abadim, for male servants. Walish fachot, for female servants. Wa in kone. Now, the Hebrew word that you see there, wahit makaratim, hit makir, means to devote yourself or to sell yourself. So in many cases, when you read, you shall be sold unto your enemies, such as in most King James versions, that is not translated accurately. The better and accurate translation comes from the hitpa'il verb stem, where it says wahit makoratim. Now, the people who want to snap on, as they call the black Hebrew Israelites, honestly swear up and down that there's not one black man from New York to California, from Maine to Oregon, or from Florida to the state of Washington who did not sit there and study any Hebrew linguistics. Somebody, as it says in Obadiah about Esau, the pride of your heart have beguiled you. Somebody done lied to you. All right? So we want to point this out for edification purposes. It says, Wahit Malkartim, and you shall sell yourselves. You should devote yourselves. Sham, there. Lo eberka, to your enemies, for your enemies. La abadim, for male servants, for female servants. Walish fakot, and for female servants. Wa in kone, and there is no redeemer. There is no buyer. There is no purchaser. All right, so it comes from the root word kwana. When you go to the book of Nehemiah, as pointed out in the book Egypt Talk and Writing that I wrote back in April of last year, glory to the Most High. When you go into the book of Nehemiah, chapter 5, verse 8, it speaks in regards to we have redeemed, anatnu kwaninu. The word kwana means redeem. It means purchaser. It means buyer. One person who tried to be a naysayer against myself in presenting this particular matter tried to sit there and say, without hearing the whole presentation, was saying, oh, well, brother, you're saying that the word kwana means save. I never said the word kwana meant save. But the person never listened to the whole thing, but speaking about it as if he did. What do we call that? Foolishness. A person who speaks without hearing the whole matter. And that's what happens in many cases. Okay, so we're going to go on to the next slide. Thank you. The explanation of the verbs. All right. Heshib. The word heshib from shab. Shab means en route to return. The word heshib means to restore or to cause to go back. Source, 201 Hebrew verbs by Hilkin. Now looking at the right-hand side, tosif. The word tosif from yasaf. Yasaf means en route to add. The word tosif means to add or to increase. Source, 201 Hebrew verbs. And so we want this to be noted for edification purposes. So when it says lo tosif od, it shall not add. It should not increase unto you. The captivity, the Mizraim, the double distress, the double straits, as we went over in the last teaching on this channel entitled The Teaching on Hebrew and Why We Are Old Testament, it goes to show you that that was not supposed to have been increased. After Yisrael left out of the land of captivity, they was not supposed to go back into the land of captivity. So this is something we want to point out for edification purposes. Next slide, please. Thank you. The explanation of verbs, part 2. Leod okta, leod okt, the infinitive meaning to see, coming from the root word ra'ah. Ra'ah means to see. Leod okta. Now, if you look at the English there with the AH, I bold typed it and capitalized it for a reason. It means what? To see it or to see her. What is it? The captivity. Then let's look at the right-hand side where it says, well, it says heat makartim, right? Heat makartim, a verb of the hipael stem, meaning to sell oneself or devote oneself. Let's explain this right here. The Hebrew word makar, mem kafresh, means to sell. Okay. Makartim means you all sold, you all devoted. The prefix with the hey and the tau shows it to be in the reflexive or the hipael stem. These are things that when the Christian apologists attempt to talk about the, as they say, black Hebrew Israelites, they swear, excuse me, niggas don't read. And this is the mentality that they're able to sit there and go so hard with saying, oh, this is only talking about the Romans. They didn't think somebody was going to go to Deuteronomy 28, verse 65 and say, hold on, this is a conjunction. So let's keep reading further up to see where it connects at. They didn't expect somebody to pick up a dictionary and see what part of sentence structure the word and falls in at. See, they slept on the house of Yisrael because they slept on the Most High. See, because the Most High turned his back on Jacob, the nations felt, well, we can sit there and do anything we want to Jacob. You can't. So this is something we want to point out for reason and purposes. It says then what? Source, 501 Hebrew verb books. The root word of such is the word makar, meaning to sell. Okay, now, as stated, when you make it into the reflexive, which is the seventh of the seven stems, you add the prefix, the hey, and the tau. Hit makir, to sell oneself or to devote oneself. So I just want that to be pointed out for reason and purposes. Next slide, please. The explanation of verbs, part 3. This is why we said this is called the matter of Deuteronomy 28, verse 68, the extended version, part 1. And it says this, quone, from the root quana, meaning to buy. Many say the Israelites are incorrect when we say that quana also means to redeem, citing that ga'al as also the word pada means to redeem. Yes, it does. Yet we also see an example in Nehemiah cited in my book also, and it says this, and I said unto them, we after our ability have redeemed our brethren the Jews that sold themselves unto the heathen, and would ye nevertheless sell your brethren that and should they sell themselves unto us? Then held they their peace and found never a word. The Hebrew says this, all right? Wa'omra lahem anachnu kwaninu et achenu hahudim wanim karim lagoyim kadei banu wagam atem tim kiru et achekim wanim kiru lanu wayaka rishu walo mats udabor. So this is something we just wanted to point out. Now the part that you see there on the right hand side when it says redeemed and then it says the bold type in the Hebrew, anachnu kwaninu, means we redeemed. Kwaninu, all right, comes from the root word quana, which means, as stated, to redeem, also meaning to buy, also means to purchase, also means to acquire. So when we read in Deuteronomy 28, verse 68, while in quone, it means there's no buyer, there's no redeemer, there's no purchaser. This is what we want to point out for edification purposes. All right, next slide, please. It says this. The Hebrew verbs. There are 7 stems in Hebrew verbs. They are the qual or the kal stem, which means simple active. There is the nif'al, which is the simple passive. There is the pl, which is the causative at times, but in most cases the intensification of the qual stem. There is the pu'al stem, which is the passive of the PL. There is the hif-el stem, which is the causative of the qual. There is the hof-al, said sometimes as haf-al stem, which is the passive of the hif-el, and the hip-el, which is the reflexive of the verb. So let's understand what's going on. You have a word, all right, simple active. That is to say, the word naga means what? To touch. The Hebrew root word niga means what? To be touched. That would be under the aspect of the nif'al. Okay, you have a verb such as the word nashak, which means to kiss. Then you have the word nishek, which means to kiss intensely. The word nishek will be under the PL stem. Okay, you have a verb such as the word kabed, which means to honor. Okay, then you have the word kubad, which means to be honored, which will fall under the pu'al stem. You have the word mashak in the qual stem, which means to pull. Then you have the word hamshake, which means to continue when you're looking at it inside of the hifel stem. You have the Hebrew word hamshake, which means to continue. Then you have the word hamshak, which means to be continued under the haf-al stem. You have the word, brothers and sisters, rakats, which means to wash inside of the qual stem. And then you got the word under the reflexive hit raket, which means to wash oneself. That's how you can explain the 7 verb stems in Hebrew. All right, using different verbs once it comes down to that particular aspect. As stated, brothers and sisters, they did not expect somebody that is of color and a male in the United States of America to sit there and get into the Hebrew. I have conversed with these people. I have conversed with them and debating with them. They do not know Hebrew. And when I say that, it's just like me saying I do not know Spanish. I can look up a Spanish word. I can even say a couple of Spanish words. But if you cannot converse in a language, you do not know that language. If you cannot converse in Hebrew, I'm going to have to ask you as a favor, as a Hebrew speaker, to please put down the Strong's Concordance. Please put down your Brown Biggs dictionary and so forth and so on, because you're not making any kind of logic because you don't know how to break the language down. So this is something we want to point out for edification purposes. All right. Next slide, please. Thank you. Deuteronomy 28, verse 68, parsing. Now, parsing is when you take the word and you break it down verbatim and so forth and so on. So let's see how this is done. All right. And we want this to be noted. This is a presentation given to you. Blessed be the Most High. My name is Yeshaya Yisrael, coming out of the camp of Shema Yisrael. My Hebrew teacher coming out of Hashaba, as well as Kosher Erit. I give respect to the people whom the Most High has set before me. And it says this, Weheshibka. Okay, let's look at that. The first part, Weheshib. Heshib is the hif-il verb stem, as we explained before. It is in regards to the past tense, third person, masculine, singular. Weheshibka ya. Yod Wahe, the Most High, the one who is self-existing. Meets Rayim, the Mem Zaderesh Yod Mem. Ma'zer means distress. Meets Rayim means double distress. So now you cannot linguistically get the word Egypt out of the word Mizraim, because Mizraim from Ma'zer means distress. Egypt, the linguistic word itself, comes from the Greek word Egyptos. You cannot transform Egyptos into Hebrew. So this is something we want to point out for reason and purposes. Ba'aniyo, in ships or with the ships. Ba'derek, in the way, with the way. Asher, which. Amarti. Now, the word amar in Hebrew means to say or to intend. Amarti. The T at the end of that shows it as a suffix in the past tense, first person, whether masculine or feminine singular. Laka, meaning to you or for you. Lo tosif old. Lo means no or not. Tosif. You can either say that to mean second person, masculine, singular, future tense, or third person, feminine, singular tense. Why? Because tosif means you will add, also means she will add. Tokal means you will eat, also means she will eat. This is why in all you're getting, get understanding. Okay, let's go on. but we know it says which should not be add. All right. Old means in addition. Leota, to see it or to see her. All right. The lamed showing it to be the infinitive. Leota, raot, ra'ah, to see. All right. Wahi makartim. The wa means it is showing it as the while consecutive. All right. The word heat makartim by itself literally would mean you devoted yourselves, you sold yourselves. Now when you show it with the while consecutive in biblical Hebrew, it changes from the past to the future and from the future to the past. But makartim means what? And you will sell yourselves. Sham, there. Lo ebeka, to your enemies. All right. La abadim, for male servants. Walish fakot, and for female servants. Wa'in quone. And there is no quone. There is no buyer. There is no redeemer. There is no purchaser. So this is something we want to point out for edification purposes. Next slide. Thank you. The Hebrew aspect. Why is this important? Well, since we're speaking of the Hebrew, it is important to get into Hebrew. Why would the Hebrews mean in, pardon me, what would the Hebrews mean and think when they said Mitzrayim? Why would the Hebrews identify what is known as Egypt as the house of bondage? Okay, next slide, please. There are some who say verses 48 to verse 68 is about the Israelites and the Romans only. It says this in Deuteronomy 28. The Lord will cause thee to be smitten before thine enemies. Thou shalt go out one way against them, and shalt flee 7 ways before them, and thou shalt be a horror unto all the kingdoms of the earth. That's Deuteronomy 28, verse 25. Then it says on the right-hand side, and all these curses shall come upon thee, and shall pursue thee and overtake thee, till thou be destroyed, because thou didst not hearken unto the voice of Yahweh Elohim, the Lord thy God, to keep his commandments and his statutes, which he commanded thee. So let's understand something. When the Most High spoke to the house of Israel, he said what? I am the Lord thy God, Anoki Yahweh Elohim, which brought you out of the land of Egypt. Asher hosetika me eret mitzrayim me beit abadim, from the house of bondage. So it is not wrong when we are still speaking of the same God, Yod Hey Wah Hey, when we still say Egypt or Mitzrayim as the house of bondage, because he called it the house of bondage. The land of Egypt, the house of bondage. So when we read about the Egypt, even if you only want to go with the English, we still have to understand the mind of one who is causing that to happen in Deuteronomy 28, verse 68, and who is the one that is happening to. You cannot be one who praises another God and understand what Yod Hey Wah Hey is saying about the house of Israel. All right, I want that to be hopefully noted for edification purposes. You cannot, brothers and sisters, sit there and teach, think and idolize the concept that saying you don't believe in the God of Yisrael. You call the book that he spoke in the Old Testament. You're saying we don't have to keep the Mosaic laws and still think you're going to be able to get the vision and the understanding of what Deuteronomy 28, verse 68, or any other prophecy in the Tanakh is talking about. You understand? So we want that to be noted for a reason and purposes. Next slide, please. Thank you. Deuteronomy 28 and Daniel chapter 9. It says this, and all these curses shall come upon thee, and shall pursue thee and overtake thee, till thou be destroyed, because thou didst not hearken unto the voice of Yahweh Elohim, the Lord thy God, to keep his commandments and his statutes, which he commanded thee. Daniel chapter 9, verse 11 says this, yea, all Israel have transgressed thy law, and have turned aside, so as not to hearken to thy voice. And so there have been poured out upon us the curse and the oath that is written in the law of Moses, the servant of Elohim, for we have sinned against him. Brothers and sisters, If you are a Christian apologist, for the lack of a better word, you must then by default, no offense to our brothers who happen to be what you call messianic, into the writings of Paul. And in it, it says that Christ hath redeemed us from the curse of the law. So when we read in Daniel chapter 9, where it says what? The curse and the oath that's written in the law of Moses. So if you're saying Galatians 3:13, that Christ hath redeemed us, he was that quana, if you will, all right, that is written in the law of Moses, the servant of the Most High, that means that you're not going to be under the curses that's written in the law of Moses. Because JC, according to the New Testament, if you're a Christian apologist, for the lack of a better word, you already cleared from that. So if that's your ideology in Galatians, there's no need to try to explain the Old Testament prophecy of Deuteronomy 28. All right? So these are things we want to point out for evidence purposes and for reasoning. Next slide, please. It says this, Deuteronomy 28 and others. It says this here, the Lord will bring thee and thy king, whom thou shalt set over thee, unto a nation that thou hast not known, thou nor thy fathers. And there thou shalt serve other gods with a stone, and thou shalt become an astonishment, a proverb, and a byword among all the peoples, whither Yahweh shall lead thee away. Thou shalt beget sons and daughters, but they shall not be thine, for they shall go into captivity. Therefore shalt thou serve thy enemy, whom Yahweh will send against thee, in hunger, and in thirst, and in nakedness, and in want of all things. And he shall put a yoke of iron upon your neck until he hath destroyed thee. So we want to be pointed out, brothers and sisters, that this continued prophecy that we keep on reading right here, it distinctly says Yod Hey Wah Hey in the first part. It says Yod Hey Wah Hey in the second part of it. Then it says Yod Hey Wah Hey on the right-hand side of it. So if you don't serve Yah, Elohei Yisrael, Yah, the God of Israel, you can never understand what he is saying to the house of Israel. All right? So this is something we want to point out for reference purposes. All right? So these things, it says, all these curses shall come upon thee and shall pursue thee and overtake thee until thou be destroyed. It talks about the beginning of sons and daughters that will go into captivity. Remember earlier when we spoke about the seed that we read of earlier, and that is a literal thing and not a spiritual thing? That goes to show you what, brothers and sisters, if it is the aspect of it being a literal thing, the sons and daughters given to another people cannot mean that everybody on earth is the same people. 1 point. Secondly, we have to ask, who were the people whose sons and daughters were given to someone else? We're going to explain that as we go along. Next slide, please. Deuteronomy 28 and others. The Lord will make the pestilence cleave unto thee until he have consumed thee from off the land, whether thou goest in to possess it. And Yah shall bring thee back into Egypt in ships, by the way whereof I said unto thee, thou shalt see it no more again. And there you shall sell yourselves unto your enemies, for bondmen and for bondwomen, and no man shall buy you. And Yah shall bring thee back into Egypt in ships, by the way whereof I said unto thee, thou shalt see it no more again. And there you shall sell yourselves unto your enemies, for bondmen and for bondwomen, and no man shall buy you. And there you shall serve gods, the work of men's hands, wood and stone, which neither see, nor hear, nor eat, nor smell. The last part of that comes out of Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 27. All right? So these are things we want to show for edification purposes. The pestilence that caused Israel to be coming off their land, as you see in Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 21. Then it says, the Most High will bring Israel back into Mizraim, which we already explained, means double straits or double distress. We're going to explain that linguistically. All right? Going back into that in ships, by the way whereof I said unto thee, thou shalt see it no more again. It was not supposed to be seen again. But what is it? It is not the literal land of Egypt. It itself is the captivity. That's what we want to talk about. And there you shall sell yourselves unto your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen, and no man shall buy you. All right? So, who was sold unto their enemies by self-choice? Can you help me? Can you hire me? Is there anything there which I can be able to do? And there's no one buying. There's nobody accepting. There's nobody redeeming it. Who are the people who taking the ships who never got any restitution? Next slide, please. Thank you. Deuteronomy chapter 5 and chapter 4. It says this: I am the Lord thy God, who brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Then it goes on to say on the other part, but you have Jehovah taken and brought forth out of the iron furnace, out of Egypt, to be unto him a people of inheritance, as ye are this day. So when it says that Israel was taken out of what? The iron furnace. You see how the place understood as Mizraim is described in the scriptures? You can't not be one who does not serve the Most High God of Israel and then think you're going to get an understanding of what Mizraim is, about what the old Barzel, the iron furnace is. You're not going to be able to understand that. All right, or the yoke of iron, that's old Barzel, pardon me. So this is something we want to point out, or the Beit Abadim, or the house of bondage. If you are not into the teaching of serving Yah Elohim, there's no reason for you to even try to speak on this subject, because he's speaking to his people through his prophet Moshe, who was an Israelite. Only the Israelites will be able to understand what this is talking about. All right, next slide, please, so we can gain some understanding. Thank you. What we're looking at here for edification purposes is this: the Hebrew Lexicon, page 651 for the Hebrew linguist. Let's look at this right here on the left-hand side. Zarar means what? To be, to tie or bind up. Metaphysically, of the wind. To shut up. To be hostile to. Zorer, adversary. To be straitened, distressed. Zarli, I am distressed. I am in a strait. I grieve. Wayezerli. All right? Ta'zir, infinitive. To straighten, to distress, or to vex. Now, in the book of Leviticus, chapter 18, when it says you're not supposed to marry a woman and her sister to be a rival to her, the word that's used there in the Hebrew is the word zarar, which is the root that we're talking in this particular regard. Now, let's look at the right-hand side of this PowerPoint. It says zar, right? Straight, narrow, adversary, enemy, distress or adversity, stone or flint. So when we see the word zar, we see those words there: straight or narrow, adversary, enemy, distress or adversity. When you add another resh to that, you get the verb zarar. Now, for the Hebrew linguist out there, anytime the second and the third letter in Hebrew is the same letter in the verb, it's referred to as an iron verb. Now, when you conjugate that in the past tense, you have the option to drop one of those letters off. So it's zararati or zarati. So this is something we want to point out for edification purposes. This is being brought to you from Shema Yisrael. It says what? Zarar, to tie or to bind up. So let's go on to the next part. Next slide, please. Hebrew Dictionary, page 261. It says this: to besiege, the word zar, to bind, to wrap, to form, to persecute. Then the other highlighted part says zar in a plural zarim, meaning adversary or distress. So this is what we're looking at. Isaiah chapter 30, verse 6 shows the word zara translated as trouble. Okay, zar means adversary or enemy as shown. Zar means what? Distress or adversary. We went over the aspect in the lexicon where it also adversary, aka enemy. The mem or the m, as noted, shows it to be a matter from a noun to a verb. So now, when you take the word zar, you put it in the aspect of ma'zer, you transform it from its root zarar or zur, which means to be bound up or to be in distress, and by saying as ma'zer, you get the word distress. This is Hebrew linguistics. No offense intended to brothers and sisters who try to knock us, disrespect us, insult us in what we teach, dealing only in parsing. Parsing does not teach you how to break this verb down like that. Parsing does not teach you how to get into the Hebrew linguistics like that. So this is something we want to show for edification purposes. Next slide, please. Thank you. What you're looking at here is coming from the book of Jeremiah, chapter 21. And it says this: Thus saith the Lord, the God of Israel, behold, I will turn back the weapons of war that are in your hands, wherewith ye fight against the king of Babylon and against the Chaldeans that besiege you without the walls, and I will gather them into the midst of this city. Now, the Hebrew on the other side says this, all right? All right, somebody is asking if I'm following along. If non-Israelites were taken into captivity from the west coast of Madagascar, Africa, if so, were these who were the descendants of the stranger who came out of the land of Egypt? Perhaps, but I want to just emphasize on this. Anytime an Israelite is speaking on this verse and one cannot combat it, the only thing that some who disagree initially is then going to sit there and say, well, there might have been other people there. Because see, what we're teaching shows the Portuguese, the Spaniards, the Dutch, the French, the English, and these other descendants that come from the other Europeans in today's time are guilty of the worst crime ever committed against humankind. You see, so they're going to sit there, no, it's the Romans, and just try to pinpoint it there to try to clear their mind. You understand? So this is something to be pointed out for edification purposes. So I want to sit there and expound upon that particular matter as this. Blessed be the Most High. When Israel was sent over here to the west, not saying that Israel wasn't shipped to other places, we want this to be noted for edification purposes. That was the house of Israel being shipped. Those were the scattered tribes of Israel being shipped. All right? Because it was Israel that was commanded to keep the laws, the statutes, and the commandments. If the stranger did not want to keep the laws, statutes, and commandments, they would not suffer just as the house of Israel would suffer. Because the Most High made that law between him and the house of Israel. This is now, when you go in Deuteronomy 29, verse 1, which is connected to Deuteronomy 28, it says, these are the words of the covenant that Yah made with the house of Israel, or with the children of Israel, beside the covenant which he made with them in Horeb. So the words of the covenant, Deuteronomy 28, is part of the covenant that the Most High made with who? The children of Israel. He didn't make it with the children of Israel and the strangers among them. All right? So this is something we want to point out. But as a way to try to forget the idea that the so-called black man is the true house of Israel, let's just sit there and talk, what about the strangers, you know? What about the whole world keep the law of the Most High, whether you Israel or not? How about that? All right? So this is something that we want to point out for edification purposes. Now, getting into the Hebrew, hopefully I answered the question that was posed. All right? It says this, Ko amar ya Elohei Yisrael, hini, mesi et kelei hamil kama, asher beyetkem, asher atem nil kamim bam, et melek babel, wa et hakastim, hazarim, alekem, mekut Lahoma wa asafti otam el tok ha'ir hazot. So this is something we want to point out for edification purposes, right? And it says this. The bold type part that says there, that besiege, is the bold type part that says it in Hebrew, hazarim. Now, brothers and sisters, let's go back to the PowerPoint that we went over before, all right? It says in the highlighted part, Zar and Zarim. Zarim means adversary or distress. Now, let's look at the bold type part of me, the highlighted part before that. Zar, from the root word zur, means to besiege, to bind, to wrap, to form, or to persecute. So we want this to be shown for edification purposes. So Zar is the present tense form of that verb. You have ani zar, he zara, anatnu zarim, aten zarot. Okay, so now zar, masculine singular, zara, feminine singular, zarim, masculine plural, zarot, feminine plural. Why is that important? Let's go back to the PowerPoint in Jeremiah chapter 21 so we can show for edification purposes. when it says brothers and sisters that besiege, and we see the word there, hazarim, ha, and that means, that case means that. Zarim means besiege. Zarim means besiege. The Chaldeans that besiege you all from without the wall, meaning the wall that was built around Jerusalem. So to be in besiege is a form of being in trouble. This is what we want to point out linguistically in Hebrew. Next slide, please. History to be noted. Babylon came to power in 606 BCE under Nebuchadnezzar. Persia came to power in 539 BCE under Cyrus. Greece came to power in 331 BCE under Alex, meaning under Alexander. Rome came to power in 146 BCE under Lucius. So these are things we want to point out for edification purposes. We're going to conclude in this particular PowerPoint and go on to part 2. All right? Let's start approximately at 10:30 p.m. I'm going to set the PowerPoint up and we're going to go to part 2. Shalom. Thank you for the time.